Herschel Greenbaum is an Orthodox Jewish factory worker who accidentally gets preserved in pickle brine for 100 years. He wakes up in modern-day New York City and discovers that his only closest living relative is his great-grandson, Ben Greenbaum. So Herschel decides to track down his great-grandson, and pickle-related shenanigans ensue. So the first thing you'll notice about this movie is that it has an absolutely ridiculous premise. But you shouldn't let that premise deter you from seeing the film, especially if you're a Seth Rogen fan or a fan of comedies in general. The outlandish concept for an American Pickle harkens back to certain comedies of the past. Groundhog Day, for example, also has an impractical premise that can't really be explained with scientific reasoning, but once you suspend your disbelief for the wacky narrative concept, you can enjoy the rest of the movie for what it is. Yes, a guy being preserved in pickle juice for 100 years is silly and cartoonish, but an American Pickle embraces and acknowledges its own ridiculousness in a way that feels fun and clever. And that lighthearted tone helps the movie have some warmth and earnestness. There's a certain sincerity to the themes that are present in this story. I mean, realistically speaking, what would you do if you got to meet your great-grandparents when they were your current age? Would you get along? Do you think that you would still have their ideals and values? What traditions or habits of theirs would be lost? And which ones would be maintained? These are interesting questions to ask. So, an American Pickle is all about being your own person, but understanding and respecting where you come from. Yes, this movie does have a surprisingly mature message about family and ancestry, even though it has an insanely stupid premise about a guy being stuck in pickle brine for a century. And there's also some commentary on social media and PC culture sprinkled throughout the film as well. But An American Pickle is not a serious movie. It is definitely goofy as hell, and it features a ton of cartoonish elements that take enormous leaps in logic. But the film is able to take a fundamentally simplistic and silly concept and turn it into a sweet and heartfelt story with some serious undertones hidden just beneath the surface. Most movies that are shot on a 4:3 aspect ratio are so overly serious. I'm looking at you, A24, and even though the entire film here wasn't shot in 4:3, I appreciated the light tone that was present in the 4:3 segments. But I will say that I noticed that the corners of the 4:3 screen had a certain blurring effect going on. And those blurred edges did bother my eyes a bit, as I did find the effect to be a little disorienting. But I will admit that that is probably the most nitpicky thing that I have ever said on this channel. Nevertheless, An American Pickle does have a fair amount of real issues. The movie is about a fish out of water character, so his development definitely feels a little cliche. Certain jokes in the film are a little cheap and easy since they revolve around this aloof character not knowing about modern society. The story itself is simplistic, so the narrative is admittedly predictable, and the structure of the film is a little sporadic, so it probably could have been tightened up to feature a sharper focus. I also understand that comedy is subjective, and that not everyone enjoys Seth Rogen's sense of humor. So the style of An American Pickle just may not be for everyone. But even as a Seth Rogen fan myself, even I have to admit that I was impressed with Rogen's work here. Rogen basically carries the film on his own since he plays both Herschel and Ben Greenbaum, and both characters clearly have distinct personalities from one another. Modern day Ben may seem like your typical Seth Rogen-esque character at first, but there is a certain layer of complexity that is present here. Ben is an average, everyday, normal guy, but he is smart, and he is capable of making a name for himself, but he's scared of how harsh the world can be. and despite being pretty removed from his family, he is concerned with protecting his family's legacy. Herschel, however, is pretty unlike any other Rogen-esque character. There's a clear pain that exists within Herschel, which comes from the fact that he never got to meet his own family to begin with. But that pain doesn't stop Herschel from being a fun, driven, and motivated character who is determined to leave behind a successful family legacy. So, An American Pickle may not be a perfect movie, but it is enjoyable. And at a brief 89 minutes long, the film doesn't extend its ridiculous premise too far. It goes by rather quickly. So this is just a nice, easygoing, lighthearted, mid-budget movie that stands out in a time where it isn't buried by big Hollywood blockbusters. I enjoyed the surprising amount of heart and maturity found in this otherwise silly film. And for that, I would likely give An American Pickle 3.5 out of 5 stars. Thanks for watching.